Hey everybody out in YouTube land, my name is Mike and I love guitars. In today's video, we're going to dig into my past a little bit and talk about a really cool vibey guitar that I had in the late 90s. And we're also going to check out this 1979 Gibson The Paul that I recently bought. Let's do this. Disclaimer! Disclaimer! Disclaimer. This is not a sponsored video. All gear in this video was either purchased by me or by a friend who's lending it to me for the purposes of this video. Most importantly, all thoughts and opinions expressed in this video are mine. Once upon a time, long ago, I believe it was back in 1858, I used to be a young man. When I was a young man, I had a job where I worked an absolutely insane amount of hours. But I also made an equally insane amount of money for someone who still lived at home. And since I had no real bills or responsibilities to speak of at the time, I bought guitars. One of those mini guitars was a Gibson The Paul. The Gibson The Paul was one of those kooky Norland era experiments that didn't last too long, but was a very cool guitar. I don't actually remember what year my original The Paul was, but judging by the toggle switch placement, it was one of the later ones from the 80s. It definitely wasn't stock. I mean, someone had even screwed a regular Les Paul pickguard to it, something that was apparently pretty common in the 80s. The pickups had also been swapped, but I still fell in love with it immediately. I played it all the time on stage and in the practice room, but as often happens when we're young, eventually I sold it. I can't even remember why I sold it at this point, but I did, and I've always regretted it. I've regretted it so much that I always promised myself that if I ever came across another under the right circumstances, it was definitely coming home with me. Well, it took more than 2 decades, but it finally happened. I finally came across this 1979 The Paul in my favorite pawn shop. It was in really good condition and they were asking a very reasonable price for it, so I conceded that these were indeed the right circumstances and I bought it. Since buying this guitar was kind of like recapturing a very small piece of my youth, I decided to start the audio demos with a section of a song from my old band back in the 90s. I played the song a lot on my original The Paul, so it really only felt fitting to me to start with it. Now, there is a little bit of confusion with these guitars as there were actually a couple of different models. A lot of people will call this a Firebrand, but the actual Firebrands of this year literally had the Gibson logo branded into the headstock, hence the name. The standard The Paul guitars of this year simply had the Gibson logo silkscreened on. And to further muddy the waters, just a couple of years later, Gibson would release a Firebrand The Paul Deluxe with a silkscreen logo. But hey, it was the Norland era and lots of wacky things were commonplace at the time. Just be content in knowing that this is simply a The Paul and not a Firebrand. It has a solid 4-piece walnut body and a 3-piece walnut neck, and both multi-piece bodies and necks are very common features for Norland era guitars. A lot of people I've found don't actually like the multi-piece necks, but personally, I really do. I have absolutely zero hard data to back this up, but I've always felt like the multi-piece necks on guitars that I've owned have just been more stable. Plus, I love a good volute on the back of the headstock. Always have and always will. I also absolutely love that the ebony fretboard on this guitar has a couple of chocolate streaks running through it. I feel like it really adds some individual charm and character to this guitar. Plus, if it ever gets lost or stolen, those streaks will make it much more easily identifiable. A really cool thing about these guitars is they originally came with T-tops pickups just like Les Paul Customs. So when I saw this one for sale and both pickups had that famous T, I got really excited. However, when I pulled the backplate off and looked at the control cavity, I got brought back to earth just a little bit. The neck pickup has the classic Gibson conductor and braided shielding wiring, but the bridge pickup has a 4-conductor wire coming from it. I can't tell exactly what's going on because, as I've said, I'm no longer a young man and my close-up eyesight is now trash. I suspect that at some point the pickup has been rewired, but I simply don't know. I will have it investigated eventually. Also, the bridge pickup ring for this guitar is not only broken, but I believe it's actually the wrong pickup ring for this guitar. The edges are beveled a bit more than your standard Gibson pickup ring, and it's even slanted towards the back instead of towards the front, which is typical for a Gibson. Well, we've talked about the things that are right and a couple of things that are wrong, but we still haven't talked about one of the coolest things about this guitar: the case. This guitar actually came with an original Gibson chainsaw case. In good condition, these cases can sell by themselves for a surprising amount of money. The felt lining is still in really good condition, though it is starting to come loose a little around the headstock. The only real drawback is that the Gibson logo has popped off the front of the case, but that's pretty common on these. It's actually getting fairly difficult to find these vintage chainsaw cases with the logo still attached, so it really didn't bother me that this wasn't one of those cases. Honestly, I'm so happy to have found this guitar. It takes me back to those days in my late teens and early 20s when life was just simpler and filled with fun and music with all my friends. It really brings back a lot of awesome memories. But memories can also be a funny thing. I remember my original The Paul as being a red guitar, and some of the pictures that I still have seem to show it as a red guitar. On the other hand, the rest of the surviving pictures I have seem to show it as a much darker finish, a lot closer to the natural walnut of this guitar. Was it red or was it brown? I'll probably never know for sure, but now that I have this guitar, I won't need to know. I'll leave those old memories where they lie, and I'll make all new memories with this guitar. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you come across a The Paul, or really any Norland era Les Paul in the wild, take a minute and give it a chance. They've always been my favorite Gibson guitars.